This is my score against London System on chess.com. Pretty high, right? Well, let's look at two of my games so that we can improve together. So this game starts off with d4, knight f6, bishop f4, we have the London system already, d5, and now e3. And here I played the move, which is my favorite one, c5 of course. The main move of course as well, but now my opponent plays dc5, which personally I don't think is the main line. The main line here would be something like c3, or alternatively knight f3. These are the main lines. You could also probably play knight d2. Although you have to be a bit concerned about this one. I don't know what's the evaluation here. Perhaps you could play knight b3, but this knight is a bit awkward now after knight c6, c3. So not sure whether this knight belongs here or not. My opponent takes. I now play knight c6, and the reason for that is I want to control the center with e5. I will gain the pawn back after my pawn has moved to e5, and now the bishop would be activated. So with that, my opponent plays bishop b5, stopping me from playing e5. Well, does that mean I've blended a pawn? Not exactly. I play e6. I can't play e5, but I can play e6, can't I? b4 by white. And now I play a5. I say, well, if you get rid of your b4 pawn, I take your c5 pawn. So he plays c3. I'm like, okay, you have defended that pawn, but I can now take after bishop d7. I am now free to take on b4. So he plays knight f3, which is a slightly dubious move. You'll see why it's not clear why it's a dubious move. But takes. I take with the bishop, not with the pawn, and you'll see why in just 1 second. After bishop takes c4, try to think what I played here. b6. Excellent move, because now b4 pawn is unprotected, and only thing in my way is the c5 pawn, so I try to get rid of that c5 pawn. Notice, if you take here, then again, bishop takes b4 with tempo, and then I can take on b6 now. I wanted to stop castling, so perhaps I could have played bishop b5, but there is b7, which is annoying. So that's why I have to take. Okay, with that, bishop c6, cb4, b6, and we have knight d4 by white here. What to do? Well, if I move my bishop to d7, if I play passively, my opponent plays c6, which is not ideal, because now this pawn might even come to c7. Or he could just, chill with a protected pass pawn on c6. That would be horrible for me. I don't want that to happen. So, I played bishop a4. Queen d2. A mistake by white. He probably underestimated my response, knight e4. Queen has to go, and now I'm developing with force. I take on c5, c5, and queen f5. Check. Knight d2, bishop takes c5. Notice, now he can't even castle because the d2 knight hangs. And all because he has wasted 2 moves to take my bishop, and then he made a lot of pawn moves. So in the opening, if you're moving the same pieces twice, you're making unnecessary pawn moves, chances are you'll land in trouble, as it happened in this game. Short castling. I took on d2, queen g4, and well, I'm already a piece up, so it's just a need for me to consolidate, and well, he resigns. So bishop d4 here takes, and white actually resigns, and I win the game. So this is the first game of the video. This next game of mine is a positional masterpiece which I created when I was rated around 2000. Now I am 2375. But it's so instructive positionally that if you are a serious player trying to improve, this game will definitely make a difference to your strength. Let's have a look. So this also starts off with d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop f4. We now have the London system. e3, c5, c3, knight c6, bishop d3, and now bishop d6. This is what I had prepared at the time. Bishop g3, and short castle. Knight d2. And the move I would play here before was b6. Well, if I were to play this position again, I would still play b6. And the idea of this line will become clear in just a second. White plays knight e5, the main move, because white wants to play the move f4 and, gain big control over the center. But for that, he, misplaces his bishop on g3. You'll see in a second, bishop b7, f4. Now this bishop looks a bit awkward. And given a chance, white would love to take here. What can I do? Notice that by playing f4, black has weakened e3, but also e4 is slightly weakened. So I play the move knight e7. I want to place this knight on e4. And then I want to take advantage of the outpost that I've got. If he plays bishop h4, that's not really ideal because I can still play knight e4. And if you take, I have the bishop pair. Yes, you have gotten rid of your bad bishop, but I still have the bishop pair, which can be very useful. For example, he can take, bishop goes back, and I can start to make your pieces very uncomfortable. For starters, I can take on d4. This is already uncomfortable. If you take with the e-pawn, f6, knight c4, I have bishop takes f4. So that's not happening. But furthermore, if you, let's say, take bishop e2 and you take with the c-pawn, then I have bishop b4 check, and now you can't castle for the whole game. So this is also worse for you. King f2 is not desirable. So f4 97, my opponent plays queen e2. And queen e2 is a bit dubious move. He should stop me from playing knight f4 by playing queen f3. If he had actually played queen f3, then I would have played knight f5, most likely. Bishop f2, bishop e7, g4, and I would have played knight d6. So the idea of bishop e7 was to create a square for the knight to go to d6, and this knight jumps to e4 after that. Queen e2, I play knight e4 again, bishop f2, and guess what? Now that the knight has moved, I can play f6 to kick off this knight, and that's exactly what I do. I play f6, knight f3. Now, all white's pieces are in like one group, while my pieces, seem to have a bit more space now. How should I continue? I play queen d7. I do not know whether I want to play c4 yet or not, but I do know that I want to coordinate my pieces. So queen d7, short castle, c4, and it's a question to this bishop. Does he want to take or does he want to retreat? If he takes, then this knight has no other way but to go to e1, which is a very sad square. This bishop is a sorry sight, this knight is a sorry sight. I just continue with b5 and my position is completely okay. If b3, I potentially have something like knight d5, you take, I take on c3, and definitely black is much better here. So going back, my opponent retreats the bishop, I play b5, rook d1, and I play rook c8 because now I'm focusing all on the queen side. The center is locked, I can't play on the king side, so it makes sense for me to play on the queen side. I bring my pieces there. Rook c1, queen e8, knight f1, a5. I want to break with b4 and make this a weakness. Knight d2, king h8, just a waiting move. I have all the time in the world. In a close position, you don't need to rush. And I guess my idea with king h8 was, in some scenario, if white takes and plays b3, and let's say in some scenario, he gets some pressure along this diagonal, my king is on a safe square. That was the idea. So king h8, my opponent plays knight g3. And this is where I show some good understanding. Knight g3 is a dubious move because I actually took on d2, he took, and I played f5. Notice why I do that right now and not few moves earlier. This knight cannot come to e5, which is the outpost. It is available. He stands on g3 rather than f3. If it was on f3, he would just jump to e5 straight away. But now he has to make one move. Like he'll have to play knight f1, knight h2, knight f3, knight e5. That's going to take multiple moves. And white simply does not have time for that. So bishop e1, bishop a6. This is not a dubious move. Engine just thinks b4 was possible straight away. Maybe b4 directly is a bit better, but nothing significant. Queen f2, b4, knight e2, and b3. Why am I sacrificing the pawn? Well, if he takes twice, then I simply have rook b8. So in the game, he played bishop d3. I took a4. I want to play a3, make this guy a pass pawn. Rook b1, queen b5, rook d1, queen c4, knight c1. And well, I can play a3 anytime I want. I wanted to coordinate my pieces first. There is no rush in a close game when you have the advantage. So knight g8, queen f1, knight f6. I am maneuvering my knight to e4. Knight d3, knight e4. Again, look at his pieces, how much I've constricted them. Knight f2, knight f6 again, bishop d2, and rook a5. I'm in no rush whatsoever. I'll double my rooks. I'll maybe put a rook on b5. He's keep guessing. He can keep guessing. Rook b5, queen e1, knight d7. Now I'm slowly bringing my knight towards the queen side as well. No rush whatsoever. Bishop e7, g3, knight b6, king f2, queen c6. Now this knight has found another square which I had seen from a distance, that this knight can jump to c4. And now that I've plugged that gap, I'm attacking this, and I'm threatening a3. This is just lost for white. a3 comes, b2, bishop d2, knight a3, and well, soon enough, he just resigns because after bishop f6, he has absolutely nothing. If you take on g5 or e6, I mean, I have queen d3 and I simply win the game. So, instructive positional game. I think I showed some good maneuvering, very instructive from a perspective of an improving player. And yeah, hopefully you learned some lessons from this game. If you would like me to make a full repertoire on London system, I am very happy to do so. Just let me know in the comments and do subscribe if you enjoyed the video.